Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roan Hunter. Let's jump right in.
Back again for another episode of the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast. I am never, ever going to get tired of saying that.
It is fun. I when we've spoken in different environments, it's just fun to say that. But it's the most fun is when we get to say it in church.
Oh man, yeah. It gets very quiet, doesn't it? More quiet than church already is.
Oh yeah. Although you do hear kind of the immature snickering and laughing. Even you can't say sex in church. If the pastor says it, everybody kind of this nervous laughter because we're not very adult when it comes to sex. Yeah.
I thought you were about to say we're not very adult when it comes to pastoring. Looking right at me. Yeah,
well, there is that.
Yeah, my former career, I think the people in my church would say, yeah, he wasn't very adult at that. That wasn't his specialty, right?
Yeah.
So we've got a pretty spectacular guest rolling out today who has had experience with betrayal and the betrayal trauma, I mean, all that stuff. And boy, she's just very articulate about her process of processing.
Yeah, Linda MacDonald is, she's been around this world for many years and truly is known as an infidelity expert. Her book, How to Help Your Spouse Heal from Your Affair, is I would say an essential resource for anyone that has experienced that, and even for therapists that work in this arena. And she's just a wealth of knowledge and wisdom.
Man, to hear her discuss just that point of discovery and the reaction. And I think that's the thing, people who are living in secrecy, that's what they dread the most. Like, man, when this comes out, the reaction. And her point in the interview was that, hey, the larger the reaction, actually, that's better for you.
Yeah, what'd she say? The bigger the storm, the better the result.
The better the results.
Something like that.
Yeah, and I thought, I really want our listeners to be able to kind of put a mark there in the interview to say, that thing that we dread the most, which this is kind of connected to the healing work that we try to promote all the time. The thing that we dread the most is actually the thing that's going to help us the most. I found that really fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Just so much that she offers in this episode, just distinguishing between what we would call sexual addiction or compulsion versus an affair. She and I certainly agree on how much we do not like that word. We just have to use it.
Right.
But there's differences in those two things. And so I think that's important. And then just, her own experience, as you said, she's done her own work around this as well.
All right. So without further delay, here's our conversation with Linda MacDonald.
Glad to have Linda MacDonald with us today on the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast. Linda, we've gotten to know her, and boy, just a delight and certainly a light in this arena that we work in. We came across her book years ago. It's called How to Help Your Spouse Heal from Your Affair. And it's one of those books that I always say there's meat on the bone. It is just an excellent resource when this stuff, when infidelity shows up in the form of an affair. And so, Linda, welcome. Glad you're here. Always good to just get your wisdom from somebody that's done this work for many years.
Well, thank you, Ron. Yeah, I've appreciated getting to know you better, and I loved your book, Sex, God, and Chaos, and I've got it on my website, advertising it because I want people to get it. So you guys did a great job.
Yes, thank you. And like I say, we reference yours often. In another podcast that we did together, one of the things that was just fascinating to me was kind of how you got into doing this work. And I would say that you are you're one of the infidelity experts in our field. If you don't mind, just tell us how you kind of got into doing this work.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I was raised in an alcoholic home, and my parents deeply loved each other, but my dad was addicted, and I always felt like we were competing with the alcohol, and it felt like a type of infidelity, and I always wanted my parents to be able to work things out. I was grateful they never divorced, but I was totally embarrassed about my dad's drinking. And later on, I'd been a dental hygienist for a number of years and decided I'd really rather do counseling. I was doing volunteer counseling for my church. And from the get go, I just seemed to have a special interest and knack for working with people involved in affairs. I wanted people to be reconciled when it's possible. And I was rooting for them. So I started doing that from the get go, from graduating from school, and have done it the whole time I've done counseling, which is 33 years. So
There's some wisdom and experience there. And so I know you had kind of engaged in this work, and then kind of something hit home for you, and you had to do your own work.
yes,
I love that part of your story as well.
thank you. Yeah, well, I had felt like I was being fairly successful helping couples work it out, and then about 13 years into my marriage, I'd already been an infidelity specialist, and my own husband had an affair. And I think he assumed because I helped people work it out that he could dabble, and he knew I would take him back if he was really sorry. The problem was it changed him. And so that has been a heartbreak. So it has added to my empathy for people going through this and a new understanding of the depth of the trauma. And so then I expanded my work into helping individuals who are forced into an unwanted divorce after infidelity. So even though I still had a heart for helping people work it out as a couple, even more so because my own experience was so devastating.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. You know, tell that you on the other podcast we were on. Tell that story of the lady that came up to you after the conference, and she was talking about her mother who had gone through had experienced betrayal. I have repeated that to people many times.
Oh, really?
That are
Oh, that's
stuck.
interesting.
You know,
Yeah.
those partners that are stuck in that place of just angry and can't move forward. I just think it's a great story.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'd been at this point divorced for over a year and had started dabbling in the dating world, and still feeling very disconnected inside. I felt like I was a robot that had all my wires pulled out. And anyway, but I went on this date to a media bistro party, and everyone there was in some aspect of media, whether it was photographers, journalists, radio talent, all kinds of people. And I really didn't fit in, but everybody had to have something on their name tag that said what part of media they were in. So I wrote down author. And I had a journalist, because I was working on a book, and I had this journalist walk up to me and she says, "Oh, what kind of writing do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm working on a book for betrayed spouses who go through an unwanted divorce." And she goes, "Oh, my mother went through that." And I said, "Really?" I said, "How's she doing?" And she said, "Oh, she's doing terrible. She's an alcoholic. She's got her blinds drawn. She's totally depressed, won't go anywhere." And I said, "How long ago did that happen?" And I'm thinking 5 years, right? She said, 20 years ago. And all I saw the whole rest of the night in flashing lights, 20 years. I'm going to feel like this for 20 years. And I just was haunted by that. And it motivated me to realize I'm not just going to heal automatically. Time is not going to be enough. I will need to be intentional about my recovery. So I delved into a lot more inner work, a lot more journaling, got some counseling, got some prayer therapy, all kinds, everything I could get my hands on, because I knew it wasn't going to be automatic. And I think especially people that have been through the trauma, they really need someone that is a trauma-informed therapist. A couple of the therapists I saw were great people, and it was nice to have the emotional support, but real in-depth healing did not happen until I had someone that knew what to do with trauma. So I'm grateful for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew it wasn't going to be automatic. So,
Oh yeah. Yeah, we often say, time doesn't heal, time just reveals. And
that's a good saying.
If I don't do the work, then I'm probably not going to get very far.
Yeah,
I'll just stay
that's
stuck.
true.
And boy, I love that story because it's illustrative of so many partners. And just for our listeners, partner is the term that we use for the one that's been betrayed. And Linda, when you're working with, just talk a little bit about the differences that you see in working with a male partner versus a female partner when it's been if the wife is betrayed and working with the man as the partner.
Yes, I would say that the men are a little bit more disturbed about the physical part of the affair, and the women tend to be more engaged in knowing the emotional part, and both are affected by the lies. Trust that is shattered like that is pretty uh, you know, pretty devastating, but they seem to each focus on where their greatest injury is. It isn't that men don't care about the emotional aspect. That can be very threatening. Statistically, from my understanding, talking to Dr. Shirley Glass, as she said, men tend to be a little less forgiving than women are. And I don't know if that's because women are just more dependent financially, care of the kids. Their value is so much even higher in the relationship than it is like their work, where men, a lot of times, their identity's in their work first and their marriage is second. But yeah, that's just been a general difference that I've noticed. Both of them tend to want to know details about what happened. I would say the men focus on the physical details. I think they're just more territorial, and they're visual. And so the visuals get to them maybe a little bit more. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But both people end up very injured, and it takes I've worked with people though on both sides that do recover and work on their marriages when they've got a willing, straying partner that does a turnaround. So I'm big believer in second chances when it's possible.
Oh yeah, yeah. I certainly concur with you in just that whole. There's some nuances certainly between the betrayed male partner and the betrayed female partner, and I think it's just part of that's the creative design. Eve was created for relationship, and that's why she showed up. So it's in her DNA, and oftentimes, I think a woman that's been betrayed will get labeled very quickly as she's just codependent. She should leave him.
Yeah.
When the reality of it is, because of the creative design going back to the beginning, she's just wired for relationship, and she will stick longer than the man will, because us men, we're mostly just fancy dirt, and so we'll bail pretty quick, right? But I'm sure you've seen it. Just wives will hang in there, and not that I think it they shouldn't when there's the continued abuse or acting out, but when the man is doing his part and he's willing he's repentant and actually doing his work, she'll hang in there with him. But when the roles are reversed, sometimes it's men will bail pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so talk about the difference, because I are, CSAT therapists, certified sex addiction therapists, and I think I've told you before, I don't really like the term sexual addiction. I've got 2 certifications in that, and I are one. I've been in recovery, for my own sexual addiction for 33 years. But the term that we prefer really is sexual brokenness, because when you say sexual addiction, or even somebody that's dealing with a one-off affair, that's very different than something that's compulsive and repeated and patterned. And I always say it's like I don't have a hammer looking for a nail, because this thing comes in a lot of it's like Baskin Robbins. It's 31 wonderful flavors. So talk about just the differences and kind of how you work with that in when it is different.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to an actual super compulsivity, I tend to refer them out to a CSAT specialist because has a different nature to it. I would say it's less personal. Usually, the person isn't as emotionally attached to the person that they're acting out with, or the visuals or whatever their drug of choice is, than somebody who's involved in an affair. There's usually um, a lot of times an emotional component to it, especially if it goes on for a while. They think they're in love or they've found their soulmate. And so there's a different kind of deception, but both do affect the pleasure centers of the brain, which is where that hit comes from. Affairs have an addictive quality to them, but it's not as personal. At least that's been my observation. And I would say sex addicts are a lot less likely to want to leave their marriages than somebody who's had an affair and thinks they found their soulmate. Because a lot of times they're just looking for some sort of salve for a midlife crisis, depression, undealt with grief, a buildup of unresolved conflict. There can be a whole lot of reasons behind it. Where sex addiction, it is sexual brokenness, and a lot of times it really preceded the marriage. Um, I've found that people that tend to get involved with pornography, for example, started when they were 10, 11, 12, 13. And so the way of coping and self soothing gets pretty embedded, and they need a specialized kind of help. Where someone who's involved in an affair, it may have been preceded by maybe some pornography. There's a 300% increase in someone having an affair if they've been involved with pornography, according to the research I've read. So it can be a precursor, but generally, yeah, there's a whole lot of complex idealism that goes in it. They and then the rationalizations to justify it seem to be a little different. I think there's a lot more shame with a sex addiction or a sexual compulsivity because there's a lot more shame, where I'd say somebody involved in an affair tends not to feel shame, that it doesn't overwhelm them in the way that I think it does somebody that's got a compulsive issue that they're hiding. Not that there's not hiding with an affair, but the elation with an affair, the idealism, Shirley Glass calls it the positive mirroring of the self. You look
Mm.
ideal in the eyes of this other person, and you think, oh my goodness, this is so great. I found my ideal connection, and really it's just that initial idealism that comes with falling in love, except that it's increased because secrecy and barriers actually elevate those pleasure centers of the brain, the chemicals there, to a higher degree than it's even possible in an open, honest dating or marriage relationship. And no long-term marriage can compete with that. The person has to somehow come down from the high, And that's where the spouse finding out about it, their reaction can make a big difference. I know for me, I was so lulled into thinking it was just a crush, and the gradual revelation of understanding the depth of it softened my reaction. Where people that have had like an instant discovery, if the spouse that's betrayed shows a lot of self-respect and, throws the phone down and starts crying and has a fit, that actually has a better chance of waking the person up out of their affair fog. There's a saying that goes, the bigger the storm, the better the results. And so that initial reaction on the part of the betrayed can actually help, although no person can control another person's will. We all have free will. But anyway, I just throw that in as a kind of an aside.
Oh yeah. Wow. That little segment that you just went through, we're gonna clip that and put that on our website, because what a great description of the differences. And one of the things that you said, which is so true, that like when it's compulsive and addictive behavior, and I see this, and it was a case in my own journey of like I did not want to lose my marriage. It had nothing to do with my wife. That was not part of it on any level, and that is, I won't say always and overgeneralize, but typically that is the case.
Yeah.
And then wives have such a hard time understanding that.
Yes.
That somehow you want to personalize it, and it's about you and you're not enough. But that's
they think they're competing with some porn star, and it
Yeah.
has nothing to do with their looks
Zero.
or any of that stuff. But they feel so. In all cases, the betrayed feel very inadequate. But I would say that in the case of compulsivity, the person, it's not personal. It's just they want to get off, and they're coping in a really unhealthy way. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and then the affair piece is, and I always say I hate that word, right? Because it just sounds so romantic, and so
Yeah, that's true. Because you talk about a love affair.
Oh, it's just
Yeah.
great. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I always I just want to call it, well, they had an adultery. Let's call it what it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it just sounds Hollywood romance version.
Yeah. No, I agree. There is one thing I've noticed though in an affair is because the person is caught up in that affair fog, they rationalize. They reach a point of cognitive dissonance where where it feels really good even if it goes against their values. And the two opposites start clashing, those poles in their minds. And a lot of people go with their feelings instead of their principles. And then when they do that, they have to rationalize and explain away. And so that's when the blaming of the spouse, I'm not sure I ever loved you, those kind of things. And then what they call rewriting the marital history comes along. And all of a sudden, looking back, they have all these proofs of the down times in their marriage, and they just can accordion them together and forget about all the good times. And then pretty soon, they're blaming the spouse for their dissatisfaction when really it was just a real relationship. It doesn't mean that there were no problems. There's no two perfect people that are married to each other. Everybody has things to work through, but it gets out of proportion. And that's another devastating thing that happened to me is my husband completely rewrote our marital history to something I didn't even recognize. And I found that rather devastating because it's like, was I married to the same person? How come we were saying I love you to each other every day? It's a very mind-bending experience. And it goes into that gaslighting thing that I know we've talked about, where people try to invalidate the other person and their suspicions or their feelings. And that's also very disorienting to the betrayed spouse. Hopefully, if they've got a good therapist, they can knock them out of those rationalizations and bring their feet back to ground and when they do, it can, there can be amazing things that can happen in the repair process, but until they deal with that stuff, they won't.
Oh yeah, it's that infatuation stage that occurs in any type of affair. You really are chasing a feeling, right? Because
Yeah.
in long term relationship, it's just that's not part of it.
Right.
And so we get sucked into that and the feelings and everything that's going on in the brain. And those, I don't know, you may know the statistics on affairages, as I like to call them, but I think the percentage of those actually making it are pretty darn low.
Let's see, 90% of affairs don't end up in a long-term marriage. And of the ones that end up in a marriage, 75% of those fail. So if you put those statistics together, an affair really only has a 3% chance of making it in the long haul,
Yeah,
which is
but
pretty dim.
yeah, it's not very hopeful. But boy,
Yeah.
trying to, like, somebody that's caught up in that, boy, they'll deny that. They don't want to hear that. Yeah, because they want to justify it.
Well, and their feet don't come down to reality until it's in the open. They're in now living with the person or whatever, and then reality starts to kick in over time. So, yeah,
Oh yeah, it's just amazing how pretty predictable the course of an affair goes,
yeah,
and where it winds up. But it is amazing how you lay that out for somebody, and they're going to go do it anyway.
yeah, yep,
They're terminally unique or something, right?
yeah,
Smarter than the average bear.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Oh yeah. And so, in your own work, because just in working with partners, so often, as you talked about the lady that was stuck for 20 years, um, so often a partner gets stuck in that place of just whether it's anger and depression or depression and anger, or all of the above in the grief cycle, because I mean it's such a grief process, because really you've a lot has been lost, right? Your whole world has been shattered. Everything that you thought was real is not. And when this stuff breaks out, the person I was married to that I thought I knew, I don't even know who he is or who she is. And like just working with someone that's going through that grief cycle, what would you say, Linda, is some of the key factors in moving through that?
One of them is just understanding the dynamics of affairs, and so they don't take it quite so
Mm,
personally. Understanding the changes in the brain chemistry, that and that secrecy and barriers, raise that to a level that they can't compete with. So I work with them on that, not taking it so personally. Um, there's a lot of shame with that comes with the rejection. It's a stigmatized loss. It's closer to suicide. Like if your spouse committed suicide, than if your spouse just dies, of an illness or whatever. So there's shame and stigma. You begin to wonder what's wrong with me. Why couldn't I keep my spouse faithful? Which is an illusion. That's really up to the individual. You can't make someone have an affair. I always tell people you didn't put a gun to their head and say, go have sex with your secretary. You know, Frank Pittman used to say, you can't make someone have an affair if they don't want to. And so,
it's good.
so I try to depersonalize it and talk about individual responsibility. But it is an opportunity for growth. Um, I think of it as closer to complex grief. They talk a lot about complex grief now, and it's just now made it into the DSM-5R. And I think this is a form of complex grief, and I'm hoping someday that people make more of that connection, because it's a complicated type of grief to recover from. So I encourage people to grieve very specifically about all their losses, and to do it with another person that they know cares about them, whether it's a sibling, a therapist, a best friend. There's something about experiencing your grief in the presence of another person, and also with the Lord, trusting that God understands betrayal like nobody's business. He knows what it's like to be betrayed by your friends, your closest friends at your greatest moment of need. He knows what it's like to actually feel abandoned by his father. And I just believe that there's comfort to be found just in knowing that Jesus is the ultimate betrayed person in the universe. And so we talk about that and getting comfort from that. Um, Overcoming the self-esteem issues, that takes some work because we do take it personally and we think it's about us. And I just try to point out that's just one person's vote. This is one person that chose to go a different direction. That doesn't mean everybody will think that you are unlovable. That was my biggest battle, was feeling unlovable. And so I needed to have that sense of lovability rebuilt, and that was through connection with other people. And it was also in my relationship with the Lord. I just found scripture to be like diamonds to me in my recovery process. Psalm 34, where it says, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those that are crushed in spirit." And the word crushed kind of indicates, if you look up the original, it's like being crushed to powder, like just decimated. And so the Lord is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves those that are crushed in spirit. And I held on to that. Um, and I do think that people that have faith in God have an advantage in their recovery process versus people that do not have that. So I've been grateful to be able to work with a lot of, sadly, Christians who've been through this experience and know that they have that resource available to them. The other thing, I know I determined to make my process an honest one. I wasn't going to fake it. So I was pretty mad at God, and because I was sure that this man was the person God brought into my life, and that this person then suddenly decided this other woman was who was God's gift to him at the time. He didn't end up marrying her, but anyway, I just really went through a crisis of faith. And yet, just like Peter, when Jesus was saying some hard things, and Jesus asked the disciples, "Will you go away too?" And Peter says, "To whom would we go? You alone have the words of life." And I knew that as mad as I was at God for feeling let down, on the other hand, he was my only source of healing, and I knew I had nowhere else to go. So I'm grateful for that because God has been such a comfort to me in rebuilding my life and my identity and my sense of value as a woman, and um, just that it wasn't the end of my story. And I had somebody once tell me that someday you're going to like yourself better down the road. And I thought, no way, I'm ruined. I'm wrecked. And I would say I like myself better. I've grown. I've grown in my relationship with the Lord in a way that could never have happened without that extreme abandonment and rejection. And also, I'm just a lot more compassionate. I could sympathize with my clients that had been through affairs and all that, but my empathy just grew like leaps and bounds, and we know that from Scripture that we are able to offer compassion when we've received that compassion from the Lord.
Wow. Beautiful, beautifully shared. Love it. Eva always says, pre-recovery in our journey, I was her cake, right? And like friends were the icing, and God was kind of the cherry on top. Well, after recovery and over the years, God is her cake, and her friends and support and that's the icing, and family certainly, and then I'm just the cherry on top. So
That's
yeah,
great.
everything
I
has
think-
changed.
Well, and I think in my case, it was a form of idol worship. I
Mm.
idolized my former husband in an inappropriate way. And when he fell off his pedestal, I was without direction. I just thought my whole life as a therapist that specialized in infidelity, my being a wife and a mom, I just thought it all was gone. Um, I'm happily remarried. I married a really kind and wonderful, godly man. But he's not on the pedestal. I
Mhm.
respect him, but I just don't revolve my whole identity and life around him to that degree. And because God is my number one. Yeah, like you say. So
I often say, of course, us men, we've got the porn fantasy, and we get exposed to that stuff way too early. And I believe that female fantasy is like those stories of Snow White, Cinderella, and
yes.
Sleeping Beauty, right? The knight on the white horse is going to come kiss you and take you away and live happily ever after. And I tell wives often, like, what you really get is like you get a drunk guy riding a donkey backwards. You don't get the knight on the white horse. That's reality, right? Yeah, but that's a fantasy, and that's that
It is.
idealism.
Yeah.
And wives will compare husbands to the pastor, and
Yes.
always tell them, I'm like, look, I know that guy, and yeah, he's just the Wizard of Oz. It's the little man behind the curtain up there. Don't compare your husband to any
Yes.
other husband. Deal with what you got.
Oh, it's so easy to do. And in the movies,
Oh,
that
yes.
I don't know if
Sure.
anybody watched that show, This Is Us. Everybody thought that the husband there was just the best husband. And,
Oh, yeah.
it's just easy to do that. And it's not reality.
No.
So,
Mm-mm.
yeah.
We always say, M. Scott Peck said, good mental health lives in reality is a relentless commitment to living in reality. But I believe it's good mental, emotional, and spiritual health, lives in reality.
Yes.
So Linda, it has been great. Gosh, I love just our time together, and love your wisdom, your experience, and you're one of those people that's just, like I said at the beginning, a light in this world. And certainly just, your love of the Lord shines through every time we sit together, and love that about you. And so tell people, like, if they want to get in touch with you or buy the book, point them in the right direction.
Sure. My website is Linda J. MacDonald. I put the J in there because there's a fabric person that is Linda MacDonald. So it's lindajmacdonald.com. And then the book is How to Help Your Spouse Heal from Your Affair, a compact manual for the unfaithful. And it's a short book. It's good for the self-help phobic. I've had a lot of people that wouldn't pick up a bigger book, but it's a manual and it's simple. And I've had a lot of letters from all over the country of people that felt like it was a corner turner. It's like their eyes began to open and they got motivated to try and heal their marriages and to become a successful rebuilder. So,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That, I love the fact that it is a compact manual, because, some of these self-help books, it's like reading War and Peace or something. And especially when you're in crisis, you can hardly read the headlines, on your phone or something. And so, man, like I said at the beginning, it is compact, but boy, there's a lot packed in it. It is excellent.
thank
And
you.
there's one thing that you say in there, kind of the number one indicator of, like, successful rebuilders. And I quote this. I say it all the time because I think it is the one thing that's going to like whether or not the marriage will survive this or make it through it. And that one thing is humility. And if humility is not present, then you need to be on high alert, because that's what has to be present.
Yes. Yeah. No, humility makes all the difference. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
And we will, I'm sure we'll be having you on again.
Okay.
Love our time together. Thanks,
Okay.
Linda.
Thanks so much, Ron.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.